For this video, I want to go over an Anubias versus Java Fern comparison. These are two of the most popular plants in the hobby, and I've used both of them extensively in several tanks. Both plants are epiphytes, meaning that they'll be attached to your rocks or driftwood or any other type of hardscape rather than planting them in the soil or substrate, making them very beginner friendly options. I want to start by going over some of the different varieties of these plants in the hobby because there's an absolute ton of them out there now and it can be a little overwhelming if you're new. So starting with the different varieties of Anubias that I've personally kept, and I've had Anubias Barteri, Anubias Coffeefolia, Anubias glabra, Anubias Caladifolia, Anubias coinleaf, regular Anubias Nana, Anubias Nana Petite, Anubias Nana coin and Anubias Petite. Those are all different varieties of the Anubias Barteri species, and I have a dedicated video going over most of them that I link to in the card and description if you want to check it out. There are several other species of Anubias in the hobby, but the Barteri varieties do seem to be the best option for aquariums because they convert well from being grown out of water to their submerged life. There's also several cultivar Anubias varieties in the hobby too, meaning they were man-made in a plant nursery's laboratory, but the majority of them are still natural plants that can be found in West Africa. When it comes to Java Fern, I've personally kept regular Java Fern latifolia, narrowleaf Java Fern Trident and India Green Gnome. A large portion of the Java Fern in the hobby does seem to be cultivars from plant labs rather than natural plants, but in some cases the cultivars can actually be hardier and easier to keep than some natural varieties. So moving on to common issues with these plants, and one of the most common problems with Anubias is green spot algae. I recently had this problem with the Anubias island in my 40-gallon tank and it was quickly taken over the plants. Thankfully it has faded and it looks like the problem's been fixed, and I'm pretty sure it was due to a lack of servicing on my canister filter, resulting in high phosphate levels in the tank, letting the algae take over. One common workaround for this problem is to use other plants as a canopy above the Anubias to control the amount of direct light that hits the plant and reduce the chances of this algae taking over. Another problem is that, in my experience at least, Anubias Nana and Anubias Petite can be prone to melting when they are introduced to new aquariums that are still going through the cycling process, and you can see this one in my 8-gallon tank that's still cycling has taken a right beating recently. I would guess that this is something to do with the ammonia levels during the cycling process, so moving forward I will probably add the weaker varieties of Anubias to the tank once it's already completed the cycle to prevent this. All of the other types of Anubias that I've personally kept have been pretty hardy and easy to keep, making them great plants for people new to the hobby. The only type of Java Fern that I've had consistent problems with is India Green Gnome, and I was close to removing this from the tank a couple of months back and replacing it with a different type of Java Fern. Its leaves seem to grow out to a certain stage and then just decide to melt back, making it a pain to maintain in this tank. I know that people report similar issues with other varieties of Java Fern, but this can be normal in certain parameters in your tank, as immersed leaves grown out of water need to be replaced with submerged leaves. This process isn't as common as it can be with certain other plant species such as cryptocoreans, and it should stop within a couple of months of adding the Java Fern to your tank. So both plants do have issues, but in the grand scheme of things it's really nothing major, and for the most part both varieties are easy to keep, making them great plants for beginners. Due to this, I am going to class this section as a draw between both of the plants because there's no major problems with either of them. Moving on to cost and availability, and both of these plants are very popular and sell well, so they are easy to find in most aquarium stores. Prices will vary depending on the vendor, the specific plant nursery that the plants came from, and the specific variant of the plant that you are trying to get, but here in the United Kingdom both usually retail for around £6 or $8 US. One of the only real standouts to this is Anubias Coffeefolia, which is one of my favourites that is usually around double the price of the other varieties of Anubias, but judging by how often it's out of stock, I don't think the shops are having any problems selling it. Off the top of my head, I can't actually think of any standout varieties of Java Fern that have a higher or lower cost. They're all pretty much around the same. So again, I am going to class the cost section of the video as a draw between the two plants because realistically they're the same price for the vast majority of options out there. I want to quickly touch on propagation and reproduction as both plants are easy to propagate. In theory, you could buy one plant and propagate it over and over again and get an infinite number of free plants moving forward, provided you have the time to wait and let the baby plantlets grow out. Starting with Java Fern as it's the easiest, and you can look for these small baby plantlets grown on the Java Fern leaves and then just remove them from the mother plant. You can either put these in a plastic tub and add nutrients to it to grow them out, or just add them to some hardscape in a different aquarium and then let them grow out there naturally. One of the best things about these baby Java Fern plantlets is that they've been grown submerged in water, so they shouldn't have that melt phase that immersed grown Java Fern can have in certain aquarium setups. Some Java Fern can arrive from the store with these baby plantlets on them, but once you submerge the plant in your aquarium, it usually only takes a month or two for the plantlets to start forming once the plant is added to your tank. Moving on to Anubias, and this one is a little more time consuming as you have to wait for the rhizome of the plant to grow to a length where it's easy enough to cut it without causing any real problems. Personally, I haven't actually done this with Anubias because it takes so long for the rhizome to grow. I just find it easier to buy new plants, but there are guides online of people who've done this and just been able to propagate their Anubias over and over and over again. In my opinion, Java Fern does sneak out ahead for this section and get the win because not only is it easier to propagate, it's also way faster as well, letting you pick the baby plantlets off the leaves and then do what you want with them. Moving on to growth requirements, and for the most part both of these plants are very easy to grow and they should work in most aquarium setups. This is my Epiphytic Beta tank and it runs on a 4.8 watt Aqua LED stock light that puts out around 520 lumens, and the Anubias in here has been grown very well. I've grown several types of Anubias and a couple of different types of Java Fern under Nicru C10 lights as well that are pretty low powered too. I've also grown both plants in hard water and soft water tanks, and in all honesty I really couldn't see a noticeable difference between how the two reacted when it comes to the pH of the aquariums they're kept in. As I mentioned earlier, I do think my problems with Anubias Petite and Anubias Nana come from putting the plants into the tank during the cycling process and the ammonia levels causing problems. I do need to look into this a little more, but you could use the dark start method where you cycle your aquarium and then add all of the plants once the cycle has completed. Flowgrow suggests that Java Fern has a water temperature range of between 4 and 30 degrees Celsius, with the Anubias Barteri species having a range of between 12 and 30 degrees Celsius. Now I haven't really tested this with Anubias, but I did have a Java Fern in an unheated shrimp jar last winter that averaged around 18 degrees Celsius, but it did temporarily drop as low as 16 degrees Celsius and the plant didn't really have any problems. Its growth rate did slow down during the colder months, but as things started to warm up again and we got into spring, its growth rate started to increase. Just to touch on nutritional requirements, as both plants are slow growers and really don't require much nutrients to survive. As I mentioned earlier, both plants are epiphytes, so they absorb the majority of the nutrients via your tank's water column rather than soil or substrate, making them easier to keep. The nutrients from fish waste, trace minerals in tap water during water changes, and micronutrients from leftover fish food could in theory be enough to support these plants in your aquarium. The problem is when you start to add other plants to the tank, like my 40-gallon tank where I have a lot of fast-grown Rotala rotundifolia in the background that could outcompete both Java Fern and Anubias for the available nutrients in the tank. I do feed this tank heavily because of its stocking levels to increase the amount of nutrients in here, but you could also look towards something like TNC Complete or any other nutritionally complete liquid fertilizer to help give your plants the nutrients they require if you do have a lot of stem or floating plants in there. So yeah, when it comes to the requirements, both plants are almost identical. They are very easy to keep, and that's one of the main reasons they sell so well in the hobby. Moving on to maintenance, and both of these plants have been very low maintenance, making them perfect for people who want a hands-off plant that doesn't require trimming multiple times per month. My 8-gallon Epiphytic Plants tank is just over 7 months old at the time of recording, and other than trimming a couple of leaves off the Anubias to make it fit with the hardscape when I set the tank up, I haven't touched them as they grow so slowly. My 40-gallon tank has plenty of Anubias and plenty of Java Fern in it, and it's around 6 months old at the time of recording, and I don't remember trimming either of the two plant species in this setup. Contrast that with the Rotala rotundifolia in the back of the tank, and I'd guess that I'm trimming this at least twice every month right now, so you can see how much of a low maintenance plant Anubias and Java Fern actually is compared to other plant types. So again, when it comes to maintenance, I'm calling this one a draw because there really isn't much upkeep required unless you're trying to propagate the plant or something like that and you want to manually pick off all the baby plantlets. Moving on to tank placement, and there's a few variables that will come into play with this one. The first variable is the specific type of Anubias or Java Fern that you are looking to use, because there's tall and short variants of both plants. For example, Anubias Barteri can be over 40 cm tall when fully grown, but Anubias Petite will probably max out at around 5 cm. The second variable is the tank size that you're going to be putting the plants in, because smaller varieties of both plants can make a big impact in something like these 7 US gallon tanks, but when you switch that over to my 40 gallon tank, my regular Java Fern Microsorghum therapists don't even touch the surface. In my opinion, there's varieties of both Java Fern and Anubias that will work well as both background or mid-ground plants in aquariums of all sizes. Anubias does tend to sneak out ahead when it comes to foreground plants, especially in smaller tanks, because there's just more smaller varieties of the plant out there with more predictable growth patterns. So for this section, I personally would lean more towards Anubias being the leader, but that's mainly because I am wanting to move more towards smaller nano tanks and shrimp jars and bowls and things like that in the hobby than the larger tanks, but your own requirements for your tank sizes will play a role. So just to offer a quick conclusion, and like most people, I love both of these plants. I have them in several tanks and I do want more of them for new tank setups in the future. I really do think that they are both excellent plants for all experience levels in the hobby, but they definitely shine for beginners because they are very easy to keep. As I mentioned, for me, in the way I want to go in the hobby with my nano tanks and shrimp jars and shrimp bowls, Anubias does slightly sneak out ahead because it's easier to use in the foreground or in smaller volumes of water, but I do still want to use Java Fern heavily in my scapes moving forward, so they are both excellent plants. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for watching and have a good day.